Allen Lund Company has new offices in Ogden, Utah, and Indianapolis, Indiana. Check allenlund.com to reach them.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Scott Thompson.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us on this Monday, and happy Truck Driver Appreciation Week on behalf of all of us here at Landline Media. Here in just a moment, we'll cover some of the biggest trucking news of the day, including a positive update on the freight market. Then after that, we'll get into the confusion that can sometimes arise after getting a ticket or violation. The consequences on your driving record aren't entirely clear at the outset, but David Grimes of CDL Legal provides some advice that just might help. Then when disaster strikes across America, the helpers spring to action, but that's not always an efficient process, especially when it comes to logistics. That's where the American Logistics Aid Network, or ALLEN, steps in, and they're stepping up in several places right now. In an encore presentation, Executive Director Kathy Fulton joins us to talk about ALLEN's mission and how you as a professional truck driver can help them carry it out. And finally, our coverage of ongoing efforts on Capitol Hill to avoid a government shutdown continues. The negotiations have hit a snag and the clock is ticking. Bryce Mungen, OOIDA Director of Legislative Affairs, has the latest from Washington, D.C. Lots of show to come, but first, the news. Hot off the presses, the OOIDA Foundation's quarterly market report is out with new details about the state of affairs out there. And joining us with all the details is Andrew King. Andrew is the Foundation's Assistant Director. Andrew, always good to see you.
Yeah, always good to be here.
So we meet pretty regularly and we talk about these market reports. And unlike the monthly report, this one paints an even bigger picture, right, of the market conditions from April through June. I'm not going to say it was a mixed bag necessarily, because any good news in this report kind of comes with a caveat, but there is some good news here, right, Andrew, when it comes to volumes and revenue. It's a pretty safe statement, I guess?
Yes, I would say so, especially in certain areas. And that's kind of what we do, just like we do with the monthly. But with this quarterly, we're looking at certain segments of the industry. And so maybe it's not broad, but there are certain segments that seem to be seeing positive things happening.
So let's go over some of those positive things. What kind of jumps out to you is, I guess we'll start with the most positive thing. And again, we're going to sprinkle some realism, I guess, onto this at some point.
Yeah.
But what are you seeing out there that kind of encourages you?
Well, my most positive thing, I would say, is when we're looking at C.H. Robinson's revenue and volumes, we do see some positive trends in that area. And someone might say, well, why are you looking at their figures? Well, C.H. Robinson and Landstar, they're two companies that we follow. They are very positive correlated with our membership. So when they go up, we tend to go up, and when they go down, our members tend to go down. And I don't have to get into all the nitty-gritty of that, but that's why we look at them. And when we look at their volumes, their year-over-year percentage change, they actually have been increasing for the last 4 quarters and are now, for the first time since the Q3 of 2022, in positive territory. So that is a very good thing because that helps drive demand. And it also validates some things I've been hearing in other areas where people say that the truck-to-load ratio in certain places is actually increasing, or the volumes are increasing, but we haven't quite seen the rates kind of catch up to that, because it's obviously going to be a lagging indicator. But that is a good sign. And then with that is their quarterly revenue that they put out. And it is starting to, well, it actually increased for the first time again, year over year, for the first time in 6 quarters. So that's, I know it's not a trend. It's just 1 quarter.
Right.
But that is something positive, that something is beginning to shift. And the last thing that we look at with C.H. Robinson is how much they charge shippers for the freight that they broker out. Mm-hmm. And that is a very strong indicator of demand, not just, volume level, but obviously if volume is high and there's also a shortage of capacity in some way, then that's going to raise that price even higher. And that's what we saw in 2021 and 2022. And that is starting to get into the positive territory. It's been negative for several quarters, and it's starting to get to that 0 to positive percent change.
Right. Yeah, so we've talked about this before, that if there is going to be there will be a turnaround at some point. When there is a turnaround, I should say, it's going to come slowly, right? We're going to see a little bit here, a little bit there, and eventually it's all going to kind of come together and we're going to be in a better place.
Exactly.
The glass half full part of me says, hey, looking at this, we're starting to see those little things pop up, here and there, and that we're moving in the right direction. I think it's safe to say we're moving in the right direction.
Yes.
However, there are some questions about this data, right?
Yes.
In terms of, is it, seasonality? I know manufacturing, as you had mentioned before, is still kind of weak. What kind of concerns you as you look at all this?
Well, and you highlighted them very well. The seasonality question is a big one.
Yeah.
So because things have started to get back to normal, we should expect to see some upticks around this time of year because we're moving into the holiday shipping season, and that's usually pretty strong. And so what we're seeing the question is it because we have moved back to seasonality, or is there some underlying thing happening that's actually pushing us into this new freight cycle, which we have yet to see? So that's the big question. I can't say one way or the other. I hope that there's some underlying things. But then when you look at manufacturing, which is what you mentioned, that is the biggest generator of freight, and it still is pretty laggard. And that's what we really need to keep following that. There are some positive signs with wholesaling, which is like another 30% or so of freight, but then another 60% is generated by manufacturing. So that's the big behemoth. And when we look at the figures, and we do have this in our report towards the end, we look at utilization figures. So they actually do a quarterly survey of how many manufacturing plants are being used to their full capacity, right? And so that number has ticked up just a little bit, but the hours of operation is still trending down. So that's not a good figure. And then the other one that's pretty telling is they ask these plants, why are you not operating at full capacity? This is a really important question because then they give a number of different responses that they can give, but a large percentage will say that they're at less than full capacity because they don't have enough orders. And so if that's trending upward, that's not a good sign, and it is trending upward. And then also another one that they can respond to is by saying, well, we're not at full capacity because our customers have sufficient inventories.
Yeah.
And that's also trending upward, and that's not a good sign. So those are some things to consider.
So again, as I said off the top here, this seems like kind of a mixed bag, and just listening to you talk, it does seem like we're looking at a mixed bag here. It also sounds like by the time the third quarter data comes out, we'll have a better idea maybe of where we stand with all this.
Absolutely.
Is that safe to say?
Yes. I'm still positive that 2025 we're going to see that new cycle kick in.
It could not come fast enough. It's been the past couple years have felt like a couple decades for sure. But again, we're seeing some positive signs. Let's focus on the positive here and hope that we are trending in that direction and the turnaround comes sooner rather than later. Andrew, we always appreciate talking to you because you provide some perspective on everything that's going on out there, and we will talk to you again soon. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can check out that report for yourself at ooida.com/foundation. That was Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation, and we appreciate his time. In other news, the task force looking into predatory lease purchase agreements has 2 more meetings on the docket now. The truck leasing task force will meet on October 30th and then again on November 20th. The group, which last met in July, is examining the lease purchase model. At the end of their work, they'll create a final report for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And a new report from the American Transportation Research Institute puts a driver detention problem in the spotlight. The study found that last year, drivers reported being detained at more than 39% of all stops. And while more than 94% of fleets charge detention fees, ATRI found they are paid for fewer than half of those invoices. When we come back, we'll talk about the aftermath of getting a ticket or inspection violation with David Grimes of CDL Legal, so hang tight. We're back in a moment.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Generally speaking, you know what's going on when you get a ticket, and you know what's going on during an inspection, at least in terms of what the process is. What you don't know is what result will come out of that ticket or inspection and how it might affect your record. Your record is actually several records: your MVR or motor vehicle record, your CSA if you're a motor carrier, and your PSP if you're a driver. To discuss how tickets and inspections may affect your various records, I spoke with David Grimes of CDL Legal. Well, our topic here is inspection violations. What are some of the common violations that you're seeing with trucking clients right now in terms of those things that come up during inspections?
Sure. So, Mark, the common violations that we typically see are either driver behavior or related to vehicle maintenance. And the reason for that is that commonly either you're going to have a roadside stop with an inspection, and that's based on the officer observation of a driver in some kind of violation, or you're going to have it at a weigh scale, and the officer sees something wrong with the truck, some sort of vehicle maintenance violation. That can also happen for roadside stops. So he drives by the officer sees he has a tail light out, pulls him over. Or he drives by the officer and he's going 10 over. The officer pulls him over, inspection.
Okay. Now, there are different places that you can face these inspections. I know, for example, the scales are a place where those very frequently take place. But what are some other places where these typically take place?
Generally, you're going to see it on major highways and state highways. That's because usually the officers who are going to stop and actually give drivers an inspection, a DOT inspection, are going to be officers who have that training. That's usually state troopers, any police officers that work for a state organization. Usually drivers are not going to encounter this in short haul situations where they're in the city, or even if they're going into a town and they get pulled over possibly by a city cop or even necessarily a sheriff deputy. That's a little less common that they would face an inspection in that situation.
Okay. A lot of people get confused in terms of violations from an inspection versus a ticket. Can you explain in kind of layman's terms what the difference between those two things is?
Absolutely. So violations on a ticket go to your driver's license record. They go through courts. They involve your DMV, and violations on an inspection go to your FMCSA record. They affect carriers and they affect drivers at the federal level. Two different ways of recording driver behavior and kind of two opposite ends of a driver's record.
Now, let's talk about the record because in previous conversations, you pointed out that you actually have more than one record. Mm-hmm. You've got the MVR. If you're your own carrier, you've got CSA, you've got PSP. CSA is the one that affects you only if you're a motor carrier. Explain, if you would, what some of the violations you need to be concerned about there are and how they affect you if they go on your CSA.
Okay. So a carrier does need to worry about their CSA. A driver who's an owner-op who is using his own DOT authorization, he basically is acting as a carrier in this situation in reference to an inspection. So if he's running under his own DOT, gets pulled into a weigh station, gets a inspection with a long list of violations, he needs to worry about those both as a driver and a carrier. The CSA record applies to carriers. All violations from all inspections given to all drivers under that carrier's DOT go on that central record for them. For a driver, all you have to worry about is your PSP. It's the little slice of that whole record that only applies to you and inspections you got.
talk a little bit, if you would, about what the possible consequences are if you have too many CSA points from a legal perspective, for example, because there's also a business perspective. But from the legal side, what are the possible consequences there?
Sure. So first of all, let me be clear. Drivers actually do not get points on their version of this federal score. That's a common misconception. A lot of times drivers will get pressure from their safety team for the carrier that they're running for. You're given too many points. You've got too many points. Carriers are either talking about internal scoring that they are doing for their drivers, or they're talking about their own points. Carriers get these points, even though the drivers get the same violations on their record, on their PSP. The PSP doesn't have a scoring system. So carriers do get these CSA points, and they build up over time. As you said, there's sort of a marketplace ecosystem around these points and the score. But for legal purposes, basically what can happen if you get too far into the red as a carrier, you'll start to get warnings from the federal DOT, and usually it'll come first in the form of a notice saying, hey, we see that your score is high in these areas. You really need to change your behavior, or there's going to be some consequences. It literally comes as a letter in the mail from the FNCSA warning you of that. After that, there's usually a warning, hey, if you don't change your behavior, you may be audited. And then that audit does come if the score remains really deeply bad with a lot of points. It's hard to say in short exactly where those lines are. It's very gray in that it completely depends on the types of violations that you're getting, how frequently you're getting them, and how large you are as a carrier. All those things can factor in.
Okay. I know this isn't your specialty, but there is that business perspective. For example, we've heard of carriers that have trouble finding loads if their CSA score crosses a certain benchmark. Have you heard from clients about that?
Yes. So carriers do have that issue, especially carriers who are small carriers, maybe owner ops who are associated with larger shippers. We hear a lot of guys complain about losing their business partnership with Amazon or other large vendors or shippers because Amazon or these other large companies have really strict parameters for what the score can be and what it can't be. So it's really easy for smaller carriers, people who are running one truck, 5 trucks, to very quickly get overloaded by these violations just because of their size relative to the violations that they're getting. All that to say that it can affect how you're able to get loads and navigate the market. And I would say that the easiest way to offset that, because it's really tricky to navigate this kind of thing and find out like where exactly is the deep water, how do I know when I'm there before I get there. The easiest way to try to mitigate some of this stuff and stay safe, if you're a small carrier or an owner op, is to watch your own score like a hawk, watch your trucks like a hawk. And if you can avoid getting these violations, or as many of them as possible in the first place, by making sure that the driver's behavior is all on the up and up, and the log books, like the ELD devices that you're using, are not on the fritz, and that everything with the truck is exactly the way that it should be. I know that's a really, really hard thing to do and a high bar to set. But if you're setting that bar for yourself, then you won't be underneath it when someone else comes to say, hey, you haven't measured up. So it's really a matter of policing yourself so that you can stay out of that trouble.
Now, we mentioned a few moments ago that there is another type of record, the MVR, the motor vehicle record. Is there anything from inspections that interacts with that record?
Yes. A kind of common saying or common wisdom in trucking, especially between safety managers and truckers, is if you get an inspection, ask the officer to give you a ticket as well. That's kind of a weird thing to say, but the reason that it's said is if a ticket, a traffic ticket, matches a violation on the inspection, then if you go and you happen to win in a traffic case in court, somehow reducing that ticket or dismissing it, then you can take the court's judgment bring it back to the FMCSA and say, hey, a judge signed off on this change. You need to make this change on my CSA record or my driver PSP. That's a pretty common cycle of getting things off of your federal record. However, there's two camps. One is what I just explained. Hey, ask the officer to get a ticket. And the other, which I subscribe to, and I have to say this, never ask the officer to give you a ticket. Never push the officer.
I was waiting for that.
Please do not do that. Even if it might affect your CSA, even if it might affect your PSP, that is a lower consequence to pay than the extreme danger for a driver, and also kind of in a secondary way for a carrier, of getting yourself into a court situation that you cannot win. And now you have something on two records instead of one. A lot of drivers will say, well, if I'd only pushed him, if I'd only asked him to give me a ticket and not let me off with a warning, then I could have fought this. And now I'm out of a job. Something that I think is really, really important to bring to bear. The CSA record for carriers lasts for 2 years, and then it disappears. For drivers, that's 3 years. Now, that may seem like a long time, but on a driver's MVR, those violations stay forever. You can technically pull a driver's entire driving history off of their driver's license record, any ticket that they have ever gotten, and you could use that as a way to hike their insurance rates or to deny them a job. So drivers just kind of need to be aware of the perspective as they're looking to protect their records, carriers as they're looking to protect their score, that a small hit now that may affect you for a couple of years is way easier to swallow than something that may stick with you for an entire career.
I know that with CSA, you can do a data queue challenge, and you kind of walked through part of that procedure there when you talked about, if you challenge a ticket, you can go through data queue with that. Is there a similar system for information on your MVR?
There is. You can go and pull a copy of your MVR. Now, there are technically other kind of smaller forms of your record that sort of sit between these two large pillars. A common record type is the DAC, which is actually held by a company called Higher Right. It's not a real government agency that's holding it, but it's sort of a combination of a couple of different things with other info added in. But if you want to go and find out what your MVR says about you, you can always go to your state DMV and say, hey, either online or just by walking into one of their offices, say, hey, can I have a copy of my record, please?
Okay. Is there anything else on this topic that you want to add or you think people need to be aware of?
Sure. So I wanted to say that if you get an inspection and you see that there's violations on it, it's really important to know what those are and what they might do to you. So I would strongly recommend doing a little bit of research or asking an expert. If you trust your carrier, then go to talk to a safety person or your safety team. At any rate, if you are running for a carrier, you do have to turn that inspection into them. That's kind of required. But there's a lot of nuance with these violations. Some of them seem dramatic, but they aren't really. Some of them seem really mundane, but they can have a really big impact. And so it's always good to know exactly what you're up against. And if you have some way of making this data queue challenge in order to change something, even if a ticket's not associated with your inspection, there are other ways. So it's always good to know what you're up against so that you know what you can do in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the information.
You're welcome.
I've been talking with David Grimes of CDL Legal, a legal services provider for the trucking industry, about inspection violations, tickets, and how they can affect your record. You can learn more by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. Again, that phone number is 913-738-4836 or go to the website, cdllegal.com. And you can find all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page. That's where we put all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers that we mention here on the show. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide. Repair secured. Load assured. Truckdown.com.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
Landline Now, welcome back. When disaster strikes across America, the helpers spring to action. But that's not always an efficient process. While studies show that up to 80% of crisis spending goes toward logistics, up to 40% of that total may be wasted, simply because organizations don't have the right supply chain equipment, knowledge, or services at their disposal. That's where the American Logistics Aid Network, or ALAN, steps in, and they're stepping up in several places right now. Executive Director Kathy Fulton joins us to talk about ALAN's mission and how you, as a professional truck driver, can help them carry it out. Kathy, first of all, thanks for being on the program. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it's so great to be with you guys today, Scott.
And we've got a lot of ground to cover here. I want to start, though, with the American Logistics Aid Network. There may be folks out there who are not really familiar with what you do. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and, I guess, how you do it as well?
Sure. So American Logistics Aid Network, or we just say ALAN, it's a lot easier, was actually one of those nonprofits that was formed after Hurricane Katrina. What sets us apart, really, is that we were actually formed by industry. So all of the business community, the truckers and the warehouse people and the material handling people got together and said, you know what we're seeing happen along the Gulf Coast is really a logistics challenge. We're the experts. We do this day in and day out. We need to have a way to provide support to communities that have been affected by disaster. And that's really how our organization was born. So 20 years next year, we're getting really close there. But a little bit about what we do is we work with businesses who are interested in providing support in a humanitarian response, whether that's, whether it's a hurricane or a fire or a flood, whatever that cause for a crisis in a community. We work with businesses who are offering their support, whether it's donated transportation, material handling equipment, warehousing. We're matching them with the organizations who are doing the on-the-ground support. So I tell people, ALAN is not going to be the organization that is handing out the bottled water after the disaster, but we're going to be the organization that makes sure it gets there.
I want to go back. You mentioned Hurricane Katrina, August 2005, kind of the birth of ALAN. That was an eye-opening event, obviously, for a whole lot of people. I think not just in that area, but the entire country, just because it was such a massive disaster. You talked about kind of the realization there that there was something missing in terms of response to disasters like this. Before ALAN was around, obviously we had FEMA and they were on the ground, first thing after everything happened there. But what was the realization specifically? Was it just, hey, we don't have the organization we need to respond to things like this? What exactly was that realization?
Yeah, I think the realization is that at the end of the day, everything is about logistics. There's an old adage that talks about leaders studying logistics, right? If you want to be the person who understands what's really happening, if you want to be the person who can actually get things accomplished, you focus on the logistics. And that's the realization that it's our industry. It's the people who are moving stuff every single day who understand what's really at stake. We know how to get things into places. We know how to deal with roads that are blocked or, trees that are down. We deal with those mini crises every single day. And that was the realization, if we can harness the entire industry's knowledge around that getting stuff done, that's the way that our whole country can be better off when a crisis occurs.
So talk to me about harnessing that knowledge and the skill sets that are out there. You've got a lot of different players obviously involved in a disaster response operation, what you're doing there. What are those different players? And I think in particular, obviously of interest to us is how truck drivers factor into all that.
Yeah. So there are a ton of different organizations who are involved in crisis response. And let's just start with the local community and the people themselves who've been affected. You see neighbors helping neighbors, and that's where it should start. But we know that when a big crisis occurs, when a big disaster happens, that community is going to be without things that they need, right? They're going to be without power. They're going to be without water. They're going to be without communications, probably. So these things have to come from somewhere else. That's where the logistics community gets involved. That's where, the nonprofits who are both in the community, outside of the community, get involved. They come and they set up massive tents to feed people, or they set up cooling centers, or they set up places where you can charge your phone. And it takes logistics, it takes transportation to get those resources to that community. That's where truck drivers get involved, whether they are working for an organization that is providing those services for fee, right? They're contracted to do it. Or if they are part of an organization or an individual who says, you know what, I know how to do this. I just want to help. That's where truck drivers are really important to the crisis response. It's getting those materials to the communities that need them. It's providing those resources that have been destroyed because of the disaster. Sometimes that means moving things from, a county away. We just did that for Hurricane Beryl, where we literally moved water within the same county to a city that was without. And sometimes it means moving things that can't be, provided within that region from across the country. So the only way to do that in a timely fashion in order to serve disaster survivors is through just the skills and expertise that the trucking community brings.
Yeah, and as you're well aware, and we're all well aware, the trucking community is full of people who want to help, who are willing to help, who offer to help in so many different ways. We see it all the time. Is this one of these situations where, I know it's going to depend probably on the areas that you're in, but do you have kind of a list of reliable people who step up and are willing to help when help is needed? Or is it kind of just you're throwing out a call out there and saying, hey, if you're in this area of the country and you're able to help, we need this on this day, who can do it? Is it kind of a mixture of both those things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a both-and situation on how we're helping get resources to an area. We work with a lot of the large organizations, a lot of the large logistics companies that are out there, but we also know that it's those individuals, it's the smaller organizations who are getting stuff done as well, right? So we may run into a situation where a large company is not able to donate or not able to provide something. And so we're really looking for those local and regional resources. We do keep a list on our website, and I'll repeat this again, but it's alanaid.org, ALANAID.org. We keep a list of everything that's active out there. Any requests that we receive, whether it's transportation, anything, warehousing, material handling equipment, that list is what we're working on right now. And that's where people can go and find out, how can they get involved and how can they help.
Yeah, I was looking at the list of disaster areas that you're currently active in. It's a long list. I know it's probably always a long list, unfortunately. But can you go over some of the areas that you're active in right now? You mentioned Hurricane Beryl earlier. I imagine there are a lot more of those, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is, Hurricane Beryl, it seemed, we've had a lot of things happen in our country just in the past couple of weeks, and that unfortunately has gotten out of the news cycle as much as it probably would have without all the other things happening. But, even so, Hurricane Beryl in South Texas, we're also working in the Caribbean, which means if things are coming from the States and need to get to a port or an airport. We need people who can, move those resources for us there. So we're doing some Caribbean support. We're also working on things that, just happened a couple of months ago, but probably people have forgotten about. There were tornadoes, in Arkansas that we have partners who are still helping people, clean out their houses and rebuild and just providing for their basic needs. And we're always looking for support, helping with things like that. California has their own challenges with weather and fires and whatnot. So it seems like we're always providing support to California. It's across the board, right? Everything from the Gulf Coast and the east, eastern seaboard for hurricanes to fires across, in the Pacific Northwest. If there's a disaster happening, our team is out there actively working to support the folks who are on the ground providing assistance.
As I mentioned earlier, and I know you've seen it firsthand, that the trucking community does answer the call when things like this happen. There may be people out there that weren't even aware of what you're doing out there and weren't even aware that they might be able to provide some help in some of these situations, especially if they're in an area of the country that needs some help. For those listening right now, they're thinking, hey, this is something I'm interested in. I'd like to help maybe if something happens down the line. What should they know? Or I guess maybe what would you want them to know about helping out with Alan?
Yeah, I love that. We love working with new people. We love bringing new volunteers and new organizations into the fold and helping them see how they can help their communities. The best way to get started is just to reach out to us via our website, allanaid.org, ALANAID.org. And, just tell us, hey, just send us a note and ask, how can I help? Here's what I do. Here's how I think I would want to be involved. Put me to work. And that's all it takes. We keep that list. We keep a list, and then we're always doing outreach. And if there's something that meets the skills and the geography and the interest of that organization or individual, we're going to call them. We can't do this alone. We're a very small organization. We keep things pretty lean because we want to make sure that all of our donors' dollars are going to support the people in need. So it's just a small staff reaching out through the network of generous truck drivers and other logistics professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you reach out and you have that information, you may not, I imagine they may not get called on for weeks, months, maybe even a couple years or something. But when that need is there in that particular area, they're going to get a call or an email or what have you, right?
That's right. And we're always trying to make sure we acknowledge, hey, we've heard you, you're on our list. But if there's something that pops up and you want to help, and you haven't heard from us, maybe we didn't know that was a problem. So reach out to us and say, hey, here's this issue that I'm seeing in my community. And that helps make us all better. Alan has lots of organizations that we work with. So if something's, not getting the attention it needs, Alan can be that conduit to the broader humanitarian response community to say, hey, maybe we need to take a closer look at this particular community.
Yeah.
We've talked about the low attention disasters because of the speed and, just the volume of news that's out there. Truck drivers see things that, because they're in communities that we can't ever get to, they see things. We need their eyes and ears to help make us all stronger and better together.
Absolutely. Love it. You're doing great work. We appreciate it. Give us that website one more time.
Thanks, Scott. It's allanaid.org, and that's ALANAID.org, or just Google American Logistics Aid Network. We should pop up for you.
And there you have it. Our thanks to Kathy Fulton of the American Logistics Aid Network. We'll pop out for a quick break now, but hang tight. Landline Now returns in just a moment.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truck Stop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
If you're running ultra-low sulfur diesel in your vehicle, make sure you are prepared and protected all winter long with Howes Diesel Treat, the #1 anti-gel product in North America from the 100-plus year trusted brand Howes Products.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Last week, we talked about another possible government shutdown, comparing it to Groundhog Day, as we were in this exact same situation about a year ago. And now we have new updates that indicate where we may be heading. Joining us with details is Bryce Mungin. Bryce is OOIDA's Director of Legislative Affairs, and he joins us on the phone from Washington, D.C. now. Bryce, how we doing?
I'm doing good, Scott. How about yourself?
Doing just fine. So, for those who missed our talk last week, let's kind of give a quick recap of what exactly is going on Capitol Hill with regard to funding the government. It feels like an annual occurrence now that we're kind of talking about this, but let's remind people about the timeline and exactly what we're looking at right now.
Yeah. And I mean, it is an annual conversation because the government and Congress, they fund all the agencies and everything for 1 year. And when that funding runs out, it's time to do that all over again. But what we have here is federal funding and the government funding runs out at the end of September, so on September 30th. And given that it's an election year, Congress, their last day to be in session is they're scheduled to be in session before the election is on September 27th. So basically, they've got to wrap up government funding, or at least keep the government funding, figure out what they're going to do before the end of the month. And if they don't pass a bill to fund the government, for the most part, funding will run out at the end of the month, and we'll enter a shutdown. So that is something I think most lawmakers want to avoid, both Republicans and Democrats, especially as they're heading into an election in November. Kind of one technical point I'll make again, I mentioned it last week, is that Department of Transportation funding is a little bit different in that a lot of it comes through the Highway Trust Fund and is not dependent on these annual appropriations bills. So should the government shut down, we wouldn't see really much, if any, change at all to the DOT programs that we concern ourselves with. But more broadly, certainly that would take over the conversation if there were a shutdown here. It would take over the conversation here on Capitol Hill.
Let's get to the latest here because there have been some new developments. And you mentioned it there, that Republicans and Democrats both want to get something done here. However, the latest news that we see coming out of Washington, D.C. seems to suggest that the two sides are pretty far apart here. What's the newest information you have for us there?
Yeah, and so last week the plan was for the House to vote on a stopgap spending bill, basically to put government funding on autopilot. What the House Republican leadership had proposed was a 6-month spending bill, so putting it through, to the beginning of next spring or so, paired with kind of a voting restriction or voting integrity bill. And last week, what we saw was House Republicans were not able to come up with the votes that were necessary to get that bill through the House. Last week, House Republican leadership actually pulled the bill from the floor after they were talking with their members and realized that they did not have the votes to pass it by themselves alone. And this kind of gets back to the math that Speaker Mike Johnson faces. Right now, he has a very slim majority in the House. Republicans can only afford to lose about 4 votes to pass something on a party line. And with legislation like this, didn't seem that there was going to be any Democratic support on the bill. And in kind of watching I guess you could say, the fallout from this last week, you saw opposition from the Republican Party coming in a few different areas. You have some members who are just concerned with federal spending generally and the idea that the Congress is just going to autopilot funding for the next 6 months without making any changes. So they want to see cuts or reforms that they believe are necessary. So the Speaker lost some support there. There's also some defense-minded members who had concerns about the effect on a 6-month extension on the military and defense readiness. Again, concerned that not being able to make necessary changes as part of the spending process would, be bad for defense spending. So there were a few different areas where there was opposition from Republicans in the House. And as I said, just the fact that they can only lose a very small number of members makes this a very difficult dance for the Speaker. I can't stress that enough. This is not an easy situation with all the politics at play for him to navigate.
So I guess my question is, what does a compromise look like here? I mean, are we talking about a continuing resolution? What does this look like, I suppose? Because as you mentioned, Speaker Johnson has a really tough challenge here in that he's trying to kind of, work with every side. There's a bunch of sides obviously working here. What does that look like, do you think, in terms of a solution?
Yeah, and so I think in some ways what happened last week doesn't change the outlook too much, because even if Republicans were able to pass that bill, the expectation was it would go to the Senate, and the Senate would make their changes because they need 60 votes to pass legislation there to overcome a filibuster. So you're going to need more than the bare minimum. And so more controversial provisions such as the voting legislation that the House had attached to it and the longer period for the continuing resolution probably would have been changed anyway when it went over to the Senate. So in some ways, we're starting to see some conversations. It sounds like the Senate is going to be releasing a version of their continuing resolution this week. The date that we've seen is December 13th is when they would put that funding bill through. So what that legislation would do is basically put the funding decisions until after the November elections, but before the new Congress comes in January. In other words, it would punt it into the lame duck for Congress. So that seems to be where there's more bipartisan support. And again, that's where it seemed like this may have ended up anyway in the Senate. So we're kind of getting to where I think a lot of people thought this would end up, but it's not maybe exactly the way that people thought it would get there.
Well, and as you kind of point out, the incentive to get something done is that we are in an election year, and I think that a government shutdown in the midst of all this would not be welcomed by anybody on any side right now. I guess my question is, if we want to play the hypothetical game, well, let's say they don't come to a deal. Let's say the government does shut down at the end of this month. What does that look like? I mean, politically, it would be, I don't know, another wild card in a very wild, few months we've had.
Yeah, and I think for any member, Republican or Democrat, it's going to be taking away from messaging and talking about whatever it is you want to talk about. Because as we've seen in the past, when there are government shutdowns, that is instantly becomes the top topic, and it becomes what everyone wants to talk about, and it kind of drowns out conversation about any other issues. And I also think that past experience has shown that no one really benefits from a shutdown, whether it's the public or members of Congress, because eventually, as it's happened in the past, kind of there's some sort of agreement that's put together to reopen the government. And I think, there are certain concessions maybe at the end of those conversations, but the big takeaway I think that the public has when there is a shutdown is that Congress is dysfunctional and they can't get their job done. They can't do the bare minimum of keeping the lights on. So again, as you mentioned, for the most part, members don't want this to be the main thing that they have to talk about when they're going back in October and just in November when they're facing voters.
I asked you last week around this time what your prediction was or where you thought this might be going. We've got a little less than a minute here left, but I'm going to put you on the spot again. Where do you think we're heading?
Yeah, I still doesn't change too much, at least in my opinion, about where this is heading. I think there's enough members who want to avoid a shutdown and avoid the drama of a shutdown and would rather be focusing on the issues where they think they have a case to make to voters. I think that the House, again, it's kind of getting to the same place. If there's not the votes in the House for this specific bill, there's something else that's going to have to be proposed. So whether it comes from the Senate or whether the House is able to find a way forward, I still think you're going to see a few back and forths between the House and Senate before you finally come up with some sort of funding bill that is a continuing resolution that extends funding here for just a few months.
Never a dull moment. Bryce, we appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
And that's our show on this Monday. We thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a
professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.